Genesis House and the Friends in Recovery podcast are proud to bring you Answering the Call, the First Responder podcast. Join your hosts, Mike the Podfather and Jersey Ed, as they address the real issues in health and wellness for first responders. From physical and mental health to relationships and work-life balance, we leave no stone unturned. Answering the Call, the First Responder podcast is available on Facebook, Podbean, iTunes, and YouTube, as well as iHeartRadio. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, here are your friends in recovery answering the call.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Answering the Call, the First Responders podcast. I am the Podfather, Mike Miles.
And I'm Jersey Ed, live in Studio G, guys. And our guest today, an old friend of ours, is Jeff Zeizel.
Jeff Zeizel. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Jeff, how's it going? Real quick, guys, I want to just give everybody some call-in options and emails. You can call us at 617-379-1163 or email us at help@friendsandrecoverypodcast.com and get your questions there. If you want to be a guest on the show, it's a great place to get a hold of us too. And also just a reminder about our Friends in Recovery online 12-step meetings is 12 noon and 7 p.m. Eastern is their daily meetings. If you go to our Friends in Recovery, a community of support, or Friends in Recovery podcast Facebook pages, all the details are there. And this will all be in the show notes. And today, guys, Jeff Zeizel is on with us. Obviously, we see him there and we hear him. And we're going to talk about resiliency in a changing environment. With and COVID and current police issues. So resiliency in a changing environment. And that's kind of Jeff's special, is the resiliency. Is that correct, Jeff?
That is correct, Ed. So if we think about what resiliency means, it's really when you get knocked down and you get back up. The old expression, you fall off the horse, you get back on. Japanese proverb, get knocked down 7 times, but get up 8. So when we think about the law enforcement community, they are currently in a pretty much no-win situation. They are historically, police officers were the people who protected and served. So when you were having problems in your life, they played many, many roles. And Mike, who is a retired low police officer, played that role for many, many families and individuals. So the child is having a substance abuse disorder, there's a disruption in the household. So they became the psychologist, the social worker, the priest, the uncle. Mike is a remarkably generous guy. So Mike would see people on the street and they were hungry, he'd buy them a sandwich, and that was the old days of law enforcement, where you had before we even had the term community policing, which really means when police officers get to know members of the community. Mike would walk around the neighborhood and he had relationships with people. They would know him. And hence, when he needed some help to locate a stolen car, who committed a crime, they would be willing to talk to him because they trusted him. Mm-hmm. And Mike is a remarkably kind and thoughtful person who was always helping people. Ironically, Mike also became a clinical social worker. So you think about those two worlds intersecting. So I'm also, a clinical social worker that happens to work with police. And I see people when they're really having trouble. So we know that the economy, the environment, a lot of things have turned south for many, many people. But the law enforcement community has the expectation that they have to be perfect with everything they do. And unfortunately, with COVID and with the changing political environment, it's been very, very stressful. So I do a lot of work with police. And my whole agenda, my whole motivation is to make sure that they practice self-care. I want them to be healthy. So the police I see fall into several categories. Number one, they often have substance abuse disorders because the job is very challenging, and Mike can probably address some of that. But, in the old days, when you had a bad call or a tough shift, or there were some terrible things you saw, death of a child, multiple fatalities in a car accident, double homicide, Mike, what would the guys do when they got off shift? How would they decompress?
Yeah, 7 nights a week, you'd find a place to go drinking after. I work 4 to 12, 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. for 28 years. And I can tell you that when I first came on, we drank 7 nights a week If we work 7 nights, we drank 7 nights. If we work 5 nights, we drank 5 nights. That's what we do after work.
And you know, it's interesting because alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. So you're having a bad day, you have a drink or two, you feel kind of relaxed, it calms you down. That's not so terrible. But when that becomes your go-to methodology, that becomes what you do after a bad day, then you are headed for a crisis. It's just
Yeah.
a matter of time until you develop a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Podfather, I got a question for you. And that is so true, Jeff. That is so true. Now my go-to is meditation. I can meditate anytime during the day. It used to be drugs and alcohol 26 years ago, but Podfather, real quick, the changing environment. You've been through it all. You've been a cop for God, what, 40 years almost, or 36 years?
28 years.
28 years.
No,
Okay.
35.
35, 26, 28, 28. Doing a lot of numbers around here. Sweets, put some numbers up, Sweets, when this comes up. But changing environment. What do you see, Podfather, as a police officer? Changing environment. Does that change in sections? Does that change by year? Does that change by political tone? How do you see the changing environment?
Well, I have a clearer view of the question you're asking now, Eddie, as an older man, as a man in my mid 60s, as someone who spent most of his life. I was in the military police for 3 years, from 18 to 21. I was a correctional officer for a year and a few months, and then I became a police officer. So I've been in law enforcement for more than half my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see a clear view of, I'd say, generationally. And usually a generation is probably 10 years, 10 to 12 years. That's, to me, I break down generations that way.
Okay.
So from first grade till graduation, 12 years. So it's a lot clearer now, and it has changed immensely as far as the job of policing and community policing. When Jeff was just explaining what community policing is, we were doing community policing when it didn't have a title. Because
Mm-hmm.
I learned from old cops when I first came on in 1979, I learned from old cops that were World War II veterans. The advice they gave me at roll call was be nice to the elderly and to children, because those are the only two facets of people that are going to like you. Everybody else you looked at as almost with a jaded eye, and there were some good people too, but as time went on, under the Clinton administration, they got a lot of funds for community policing. Lowell went from 145 man and woman department to 245 man and woman department. Anybody, I shouldn't say, I'm not ridiculing the past chief at that time, but I think anybody could have those resources and make success because you had everything you needed. The prior chief, before all that money came in, did an unbelievable job. But when you have a lot of resources, new equipment, cars, extra people, you can put people anywhere you want.
Yeah,
so
that is true.
And then all of a sudden, now we're in a situation where people don't want to be cops anymore. They're seeing what's going on. They're afraid. They don't want the aggravation. They don't want the danger of being attacked, shot for no reason. So I think generationally things are changing, and they're not changing for the better right now. And I think Jeff would agree with that.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting because we see that with the change in politics and with COVID, being a first responder is remarkably challenging. The interesting thing is that NYPD has probably the largest police department in the world, over 40,000 law enforcement officers. They have more police than countries have people in the military.
Wow.
And this past COVID sort of epidemic, the global epidemic, they've lost 48, either 44 or 48 police officers who've died. So recently they actually had a roll call of just announcing the dead. And it's remarkably powerful. And these are people who were in uniform. They're not, in their 80s or 70s or, 60s. They were young people who had probably some underlying health factors and have died trying to protect society and trying to do the right thing. So when we think about resiliency, we think about how people get knocked down, they have to be more resilient. It's all about self-care. It's about having the ability to sort of move forward in spite of how challenging it is. So there's studies that have been done about how people survive difficult times. So when someone wishes to be a police officer, they're usually highly motivated. And over the years, that population has changed. In the old days, it was people who they wanted to be cops and they had a belief that this is a great career. It has shifted a bit. Some people just looked at it when the economy turns south, people become cops because it's a steady paycheck. They don't even have passion for the job. They just want a paycheck and a retirement. Now we come to this era where the police are sort of mistreated and scorned. And sometimes, we watch TV and we get a distorted view that we all start thinking that every cop is bad. So I was listening to the radio recently when after the death of George Floyd, which was probably the last week of May, first week of June, I believe. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was a famous NBA basketball player from the Bronx, played at Powell High School. He starts saying how we have a misconception about the police. Not all cops are bad. He also said, not all blacks are criminals. Not all whites are racist. There's good and bad everyone. And then he continued to say, which I gave him tremendous credit. He says, the cops are regular people. Then he shared his father was a New York City cop. His grandfather was a cop in Barbados. So he comes from a family of law enforcement. He said, every day when my father went out, and they lived in the Bronx, I didn't know if he was coming home. I don't know if he was going to get killed. So I believe that the vast majority of police officers are fine, outstanding people. However, are there bad cops? Of course there are. Are there crooked?
Bad everything. There's bad
Exactly.
McDonald's workers. There's bad
Exactly.
gas station workers.
That's
Bad
right.
therapist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I said. I didn't want any pickles on my hamburger. So,
Well, back to what Podfather was saying, Jeff, and I think this speaks volumes, is that he said that it's a moment in time that you have to make a quick decision. It's a moment in time that you might have to worry about your life or other people's lives in there. It's not a video that keeps playing over and over and over. It's not about every single cop out there. It's not about everybody in law enforcement. It's a split second in time that somebody made a decision, and people think that's what cops are all about. And that was a good point you made there, Podfather.
Well, I also think, real quick, on George Floyd, he was murdered by a guy with a police uniform on, who I was being paid as a police officer, who I don't know what he was thinking, why he was doing what he was doing. I don't know whether he's a racist or not, but all I know is he murdered George Floyd. There's no questions asked. I don't know one cop in the world that would ever say, "Oh yeah, that's a good maneuver we use." No, and he'll be paid for that. But I can tell you this: in the 35 years that I wore the Lowell Police badge, I have never ever said the word, "I want to get him because he's black, or her because she's black, or her because she's Puerto Rican or Asian." And I've never heard a cop say it. I've never seen racism. I've never seen it. And I can tell you that I don't care what people say. I don't lie. I've never seen it. And I don't know any cops that are racist. So what I do know is the news media is a very dangerous thing right now. And I've learned this over the last 10 years. The news media has a lot to do with what's going on now. And we as a people should be looking at that.
And I think what happens is we get distorted information. So one of the things that we need
Jeff,
to do,
we get information that sells commercials. That's what we get. And
exactly.
I mean, that's what it's about. So,
and what has happened is that people who want to speak on the behalf of police departments are ostracized. So it becomes very challenging to sort of even have these conversations because people have perceived notions. Right. If you like the cops, you must be bad.
Right. If you like this president, you got to be out of your mind or you're a racist. And if you like the other side, if you like Joe Biden, you got to be a super liberal and got to be out of your mind. So, I mean, we're in a society now, and this has a lot to do with the media. I'm a guy that buys 2 newspapers a day. I buy a New York paper and a Boston paper, and I read them. And, I'm telling you that it's a shame what's going on in this world, in this country that we live in. But it has a lot to do with the media and the way things are perceived and put out there.
So it is interesting. So when we think about, what's resiliency, there are characteristics of resilient people. So there was a big study done after the Vietnam War about characteristics of resilient people. The Vietnam War ends. We get our POWs back, 1975. The vast majority of the POWs end up in the VA hospital in Hawaii, and they get evaluated and they get treatment to deal with all their injuries. On average, those Vietnamese those Americans who spent time in a Vietnamese POW camp, they were there between 6 and 8 years. Terrible, terrible conditions. They were all broken. They ended up getting the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. That's when we coined the term. And that's not to say that in previous wars and conflict, there wasn't PTSD. There was. We just called it different things.
Shell shock. That's what they used to call
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah. I remember that term. My dad used to use that. Yes.
Yeah. Shell
Yeah.
shock, trench fatigue.
Trench
Okay.
fatigue, World War One.
In
Yeah.
fact, Mike was a police officer in Lowell. Lowell was the seat of the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s. And with the advent of railroads and the trains, there were people who were sometimes not paying attention and would get killed by a train, and people would observe it and they would become catatonic. They called it railway hysteria. It's
Wow.
also quite similar to what we know today as PTSD.
Yeah.
So these guys come out, and we realized that there was a group of POWs who did not have PTSD. So why
Yeah.
was it? They
Guys,
were resilient.
We're gonna take a quick break here, Jeff, and we're gonna talk about COVID and the police. I'm sure you guys are seeing a lot about that and how they're going to protect themselves, but that'll all fall into the resiliency, because you got to be resilient to be around all this stuff and be out there in the public. But let's take a quick break and we'll be back. Podfather.
Answering the call, the First Responders Podcast. We'll be right back.
You're first. First to respond. First to put others' lives before your own. And in an emergency, you need a network that puts you first, that connects you to technology, to each other, and to other agencies. Built with and for first responders. FirstNet, the only congressionally authorized wireless network for first responders. Because putting you first is our job.
Since 1992, Genesis House has been helping real people heal from addiction on their private recovery campus in beautiful Palm Beach County, Florida. Their family-owned program is accredited by the Joint Commission and offers detox and dual diagnosis treatment in a comfortable and confidential setting. At Genesis House, they focus on treating the underlying causes of addiction. Their comprehensive approach includes psychiatric care, individual and small group therapy, trauma healing techniques, and holistic care including yoga, massage, and animal-assisted therapy. After treatment, their clients enjoy the lifelong support of a nationwide network of Genesis House alumni. Call Genesis House today at 1-800-737-0933 to speak with someone who understands. Visit them on the web at www.genesishouse.net. It's time to start your journey to a long and successful recovery.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Answering the call, First Responders Podcast. We're back from our break. I am the Podfather, Mike Miles.
And I'm in, who am I? I'm
Jersey
Jersey Ed,
Ed.
right? Jersey Ed. I think I'm Jersey Ed.
He is.
Studio G.
And we got Jeff Zeizel as our
That's right. I got a little
guest
flustered there in
extraordinaire.
our in between here or talking. I was like, we better get back on track here. So,
Yes.
all right.
what's up, Jeff? How you doing?
I'm good. So, sometimes we have these conversations off camera and it's hard to get recalibrated to go back.
Yes, get back to this subject we were on.
Yeah.
So.
But one of the things, this is a great subject because we're talking about resiliency and
Yes.
COVID and the first responders. So one of the points I wanted to make was the Vietnam War ends. These POWs come back, and we discover that a vast majority, a small percentage, did not have PTSD, and they were in POW camps. And the reason why they did not develop post-traumatic stress disorder is they were resilient people. So lots of studies were done, and they discovered they had characteristics of resiliency. So the great thing about resiliency is that there are certain people who are just born resilient. They come out of the gate, they're resilient, they're tough, they have mental toughness, they don't get knocked down easily. But then there's the rest of us. The rest of us are able to develop those characteristics. And what are they? In no order, but what they are is they have a sense of purpose. Every day they get up, they have something to do, which is interesting because if you think about people who sometimes you hear these stories, he worked at the factory for 40 years. He finally retired. A year later, he's dead.
He's dead.
Why is that? They lost their sense of purpose. That happens also with police officers. The state police in the early 80s had mandatory retirement, either age 55. The average life expectancy in 1980 was under 60 years old.
Yep.
So they died because they lost a sense of purpose.
Right.
They had alcoholism. depression, high rates of suicide. And if you think about it,
Mhm.
these were people who they wore the uniform, they got respect. They were the person who was the cop. They walk into a restaurant, everyone turns around. They walk into a coffee shop,
Top
people
cop.
talk to them. And all of a sudden, now they're just another Joe. Now they're just a regular guy. And they lost that. They lost the ability to sort of feel a sense
Right.
of purpose. So
So we're giving the Podfather a sense of purpose here through the ATC show.
Exactly.
He's gonna live longer because
so
of the
true.
show.
But we cared about that, but it's actually true.
It is
So when I
true.
see people who retire, I said, you have to develop a active retirement.
Yeah.
So you gotta be moving. You gotta have a plan. You have to have something to do every day. So characteristics of resilient people: sense of purpose, sense of humor, altruism. They help others.
Mhm.
Moral compass. They try to do the right thing. So they're not perfect, but they try to do the right thing. They have social supports. They don't do this alone. They're with each other. So when people go through challenging times, they share their pain, they divide their pain. There's that sense of camaraderie.
Yeah.
They also have a sense of spirituality. So spirituality is not necessarily religion, but it's a belief that something is greater than you. They have role modeling. So they look up to people. I want to be like Mike Miles. I want to be like Ed Chancho. I want to live my life so that people look up to me. So I'm going to try to do the right thing. So I know that when I die, on my tombstone, there'll be words that are written. Here lies a decent person, not here lies a guy who was nice every once in a while.
Yeah.
So that's how you live your life as a role model.
Yeah.
And you have role models that you look up to. And we admire people like that.
Right. Hey, when I was in my mid 40s, I was still hucking in and out of cruises. I worked early nights for 28 years, is what I had said earlier. But I was a cop for 35 years. The last 8 years, I was the EAP for the Lowell Police. And I got that job because I went back to school in my 40s and I got my master's in social work and I became a LADAC, licensed alcohol drug counselor as well, because I knew from all the statistics that I had learned over the years that my life expectancy would improve immensely if I had something else to do when I retired around 60. I retired at 61, but I knew what the direction I was going. So now I'm the EAP for the Lowell Police and for the Middlesex County Sheriff's Department. Middlesex County Sheriff's Department is one of the biggest counties in the country. It's the 5th largest. I was very honored to be the EAP for that, for the Middlesex County Sheriff's Department. And I did exit interviews with some of the correctional officers retiring. They can retire at 20 years of service. They start there when they're 21, they're 41. They think it's going to be wonderful. I'm going to retire. I'm getting the hell out of this place. I never heard anyone say, I'm going to retire because I love these people here, but I just want to do something different. No, it was, I'm getting the hell out of this place because these people suck and I'm going to go somewhere else. Well, guess what? Those guys and girls that retired at a young age, all of a sudden they're out there for about 5-6 months. They realize, what the hell did I do? Some of them try to go back. Well, it's too late. You can't go back. So I would do these exit interviews and I would ask them, what do you got planned? What are you going to do? And I'm sure Jeff, this is where I learned this from Jeff. And you know what? A lot of them, they had no idea what they were going to do. I might start a business. I might do this. I might do that. But as a result of that, I went back, got my degree, and I knew what I was going to do. I was going to have a business and I'm going to help people. And this is what I'm doing. And, I think if you don't have that perception and you're in law enforcement or any type of EMS, firemen are the same thing, right, Jeff?
That's exactly right.
Firefighter, same thing.
So it's interesting because when we talked about resiliency, one of the characteristics is altruism. So what's altruism? Helping others. It's better to give than to receive. So when you choose a line of work, like being a clinician, Mike, you end up helping others. You feel good about yourself. So that sort of fosters that sort of ongoing thing. So it is interesting. So when we think about what has happened with COVID, it's the breakdown of sort of healthcare systems. There's so many people dying. We've had over 210,000 deaths in the United States. And the law enforcement, they don't get a break. They cannot work from home. They can't Zoom the call. They can't Zoom the bank robbery investigation. They have to show up and they get exposed to everything. So we know that psychologically, when you go into an environment that's toxic, just like in criminal investigations, when they're investigating to see for DNA or something left behind, they usually find some evidence. Maybe it's a hair sample, maybe it's a matchbook cover, maybe it's some other piece of evidence. Just like there's something left behind, when the cop leaves, he takes something with him. And what is that? It's the trauma. It's the mother sobbing uncontrollably because her son is shot. It's the daughter who was sexually assaulted. It's the house where their money was stolen. They can't make any of their bills. These cops get exposed to this trauma day in and day out, and they develop ongoing trauma. Psychologically healthy police officers find ways of dealing with it. So that's the nature of the work that Mike and I do. We meet these people on the worst days of their lives. So, and it's an honor for us to intersect with these men and women who are really suffering, and our agenda is to help them. So with COVID, it's just made it so much more complicated because some of them don't want to come in. They're afraid of bringing the illness to their homes, and they also the conflicts that exist in society. So they go to these protests where people are looking for racial equality, which is an important thing. Of course, we believe in that, and of course, we believe in justice. But they're being ostracized. So not only are they exposed to COVID, they're being mistreated. So I was talking to a motorcycle cop recently where there was a protest, and someone took a water bottle filled with urine and threw it at him. Thankfully, it didn't open up. And he just looks at the guy and he says, "Really? Why are you throwing that at me? What did I do to you?" And he was smart. He just drove off. So we know that with all the sort of dynamics playing out after the Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, Missouri, we know in the law enforcement community, there was a thing called the Ferguson effect. So what is that? Cops stopped pulling people over of color or minorities because they were afraid they were going to be mistreated.
And to this day, excuse me, and to this day, protesters will be out there saying, "Hands up, don't shoot," which never happened because of Michael Brown, the Michael Brown incident. That did not happen. But that was put out by the media saying, "Hands up, don't shoot." You had reporters, you had newscasters on TV with hoodies on doing this, "Hands up, don't shoot." It never happened. But do you think the media ever said it didn't happen? No. You know who said it didn't happen? The Department of Justice that went in there and interviewed and made sure that it didn't happen. And they're the ones who came forward and said, "No, that never happened." But
so
most people think it did.
Well, again, it gets blown apart and it's stuck into our minds that it did happen because we don't hear all this stuff. We just hear it, this is what happened. This is, Fox, CNN, these guys have to be right. You know what I mean? It has to be true, but we don't hear the follow up to it because all we hear is the hype. And like, oh my God. And then we're saying, "Hey, Jeff, did you hear about this? Hey, did you hear about that?" And that's all you talk about.
The cop's name was Officer Wilson. What do you think happened to his career? All he did was protect his gun from being pulled out by Michael Brown, who was a thug, who was not only on one video, beating an Asian a Korean store owner, but there was another video of him out there beating a black gentleman who was it was a homeless guy, lived on the street, sat and drank wine all day, and there's a video of him beating him. So this was a kid that was a career criminal heading that direction, and "Hands up, don't shoot" never happened. But it doesn't matter. People are still protesting. I just saw the news clip last week. "Hands up, don't shoot," marching down the street.
So it's interesting. So our society has been turned upside down. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's always good to be self-reflective. I don't know if it's good that buildings are burning down, but it's good to be self-reflective. So there probably are some things that can be done in police departments to change some protocols and policies that make us a little more sensitive to some of these issues. I know Mike and I both teach at the police academy. And one of the things that I was very impressed when Mike is teaching a class, and he stands in front of the group of 200 young potential police officers, cadets, and he says, "You know what's the most dangerous thing out there?" He holds up his cell phone. He says, "Act as if you're being filmed with everything you do. You will treat people with respect, and you will treat people honestly, and you will save your career." So when police officers object about body cameras, and there's been pushback, I actually am in favor of a body camera.
Me too.
Because if I'm a cop and someone's accusing me of doing something and I have the body camera on, I could say, "Well, that's actually not accurate. Let's take a look at the footage." So it works for both sides.
100%.
So it is interesting with COVID, a lot of police officers are worried about being out in the community and coming home and bringing it to their families. So they don't get a break. So I was in Philadelphia in June, right after George Floyd's death, and I see a bunch of Black police officers in Philly. So I go over to them. I introduce myself. There are a couple guys I know in Philly, DEA guys, and we start shooting the breeze, start talking shop. And I say to these 5 or 6 police officers, so how's it feel for you? Do you feel safe? They said they feel terribly unsafe. They feel like they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. And it was an interesting perspective because they're African Americans, but they're also in law enforcement.
Right.
And they said, we support our brothers on the job.
Right.
And we just want the bad cops gone. And who doesn't? So we talked about George
Absolutely.
Floyd because it's the elephant in the room, and they all agreed, he was murdered.
Yeah, he was murdered.
What took place there was terrible.
And that cop will go to jail the rest of his life.
That's right. So we know that there are bad
Right.
people who make bad choices, but it's a very challenging job. It's a very tough job. So when I see police that I treat, I always say to them, so if you had a kid who wanted to be a cop, what would you say? Universally, they always say no,
No way.
because they get no respect and it's so dangerous, and it's hunting season. There are
Mhm.
cops who are being ambushed and murdered
That's right.
and getting
That's right.
snipers are shooting at them, and every day cops are being killed, but you don't hear too much about
No,
that,
a higher rate.
unfortunately.
That's right. It is unfortunate because when I go down to Washington, D.C. in May for the police memorial dedication every year, and they put the names on the wall down there. And you know what? It's increased over 300%. 300% in the last 6 years. 300%. Think of those. Imagine if you can invest your money and get that kind of return.
Yeah.
So
Well,
this
guys,
is a very
you guys
dangerous
teach
job.
at the police academy. Have you seen, and I don't know if you have been teaching lately through the COVID, but have you seen the decline in police officer
Sure.
graduations? I mean, who wants to
Absolutely.
be a cop now? I mean, I was talking to a friend out in Minnesota. He'll be on the show, Eric Hagel.
Brian,
He said that, yeah, Brian too, but Eric just told me that people are quitting out in Minnesota, and they don't want to be cops
Yeah.
anymore. They're starting a new career, and they don't want to be involved in it anymore.
So-
And
so
I can't blame them. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
blame them.
the Mass State Police are at a deficit. There's usually 2,200 state police officers in Massachusetts. A lot of them are retiring early, and they're recruiting the next class, and they have trouble filling it.
Right.
It used to be they had 10,000
Right.
applicants. Now they're lucky if they get 2,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hey, you know
That's
what? This
crazy.
has been a great show. I know
Yeah.
it's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but the reality is, if you have somebody who does this on a daily basis, like Jeff Zeizel, who knows the good and the bad of this job, if you have someone like Joe Rizzuti, who we had on a previous show, who has done nothing but help other police officers, and I throw my name in that circle as well, because this is what my life's been
Look,
about, half my life.
Absolutely. But guys, just research your facts. That's what we're saying. On both sides, research it up and down, understand the situation inside and out,
Yeah.
and then make the right decision from there. Just don't go by a knee-jerk reaction and do something stupid out there. That's kind of my thought on it anyways. Understand both sides, understand, what's going on, and understand, be compassionate. Jeff, just like you said, just be compassionate about it. Be just like a cell phone, just like everybody's watching, and just understand it and be compassionate for both sides. That would be my thought on it.
Well, this is the First Responders podcast, and this podcast is for first responders, which include police, corrections, fire, EMS, and veterans.
Mhm.
So hopefully our audience that will listen to this, I think they'd understand a lot more, and they probably do research their facts. My opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, everybody, answering the call, First Responders podcast. Great show.
Great show, guys. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks,
Stay
Jeff.
safe.
Stay
Thanks,
safe,
Jeff.
guys.
Thank you,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
That concludes this episode of Answering the Call, the First Responder Podcast. Thanks to Genesis House for sponsoring the show and supporting first responders who are struggling with addiction and mental health. Follow us on Facebook for past shows and updates. If you are interested in being a guest on the show, email us at help@friendsandrecoverypodcast.com.